Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. So today I'm sharing this whole journaling process with you, but I'm also sharing how to create a DIY kind of faux cracked window, if you will. Over on my blog, I'm going to have this SVG file set. This is just a set of window frames. What I've done is I've cut it out from white cardstock twice, and then I also cut it out from a little bit thicker of a chipboard, also twice. And I just did that with my Cricut. Now this is a whole sheet of window frames you'll see in a moment, and I just cut them all at once. I'll use what I want and save the others in my kind of ephemera binder. Now here's a look at what inspired these window frames. These are some old kind of magazine and catalog pages that really detail the kind of windows that they had for sale back then. So I just grabbed some of these and used them as inspiration for the shapes that I have on this SVG file. These were a lot of fun to make, a lot of fun window shapes to really kind of play around with and add different paints to them. A lot of fun. So what I did is I went ahead and loaded this into Cricut Design Space, and I'm going to make it. Now I like to make these as big as I can to fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. But you can make these as large or as small as you want to. You can even separate them if you would like to do that and make them really large. I like to keep them all on one sheet though. Less work for me that way. And then when I cut them out, I can just save the rest back, like I said, in my ephemera binder. There are a lot of different shapes and styles of windows on this SVG file. Like I said, it'll be for free over on my blog. That link will be down in the description box below. But you can really do this technique with any one of these files that is on this sheet. So mine ended up being about 7.5 inches wide by 9 3/4 inches tall. That is what will fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper for my Cricut Design Space, because you do have that cut area around. That's kind of a drawback of the Cricut, if you will. So I'll go ahead and change the size of my cutting mat to 8.5 by 11, and then I'll just go ahead and cut it as I would. Like I said, when I cut this, I cut it from white cardstock twice, and I also die cut it from chipboard twice. I wanted enough layers to play around with. I think I only ended up using 2 of the chipboards and then 1 of the white pieces of cardstock, but you can really layer this up and make it quite thick if you want to. So for the window pane, you are going to need some sort of clear plastic sheet. For me, I always like the Duralar. This is a great project to use up those scraps that you may have, or some pieces like this one where I got some adhesive stuck on it. I'm just going to use around that adhesive. What I'm doing is just creating a place to put my paint. You want this the exact size or wider actually of your openings in your window frames, and some of these have a little bit of a curve, so I just like to use the window frame itself as a guide and use my craft knife or X-Acto blade to cut around that. I just hold the window frame up to the Duralar film and cut through it. Now the exact Duralar film that I use, I will link over on my Amazon storefront page on the supply list. It's my favorite. It's what I used on last week's project on those floating frame cards that I did. I use it for all my shaker cards. It's just my favorite. Holds up really well. One thing is it is a little staticky. You may need to run a little bit of your embossing bag over it. That's with any sort of, even vellum for me in my climate has a little bit of static to it. Now once I get that cut out, I'm going to go ahead and glue it to the back of the window frame. For this, I'm using a liquid glue, and I'm using a very strong liquid glue. This is Fabri-Tac. This is going to hold everything in place. I don't have to worry about, even with the slick surface it coming off, this is going to make sure that holds down. The reason I didn't use paper tape is very simple. I didn't have a piece small enough to fit around the frame of the window frame, the paper parts of it, so I just went with liquid glue. That is one drawback of these. They are quite small, so liquid glue is probably going to be your best bet. Just make sure you use a nice strong one, especially on that plastic piece. Now to get the paint to stick, I am going to rough up this the Duralar film that is in there. So I'm just taking this sanding block and I'm going to go across one way and then up and down the other. You really just want to give this a nice scuff up. That's going to allow the paint to have some little grooves to sit in, somewhere to hold on to. Otherwise, it's just going to chip off. And once you're done, you will not be able to see these scratch marks. They just kind of blend right in. I promise you won't be able to see them. So give it a good scuff up on the top and the bottom, or anywhere that you're going to be putting this crackling effect. So just across one way and then up and down the next. A little bit of a hash mark, if you will. And like I said, that is really just in order to give the paint somewhere to sit. And you want to make sure that you're doing this on the side that is going to house that paint. So of course your plastic is going to have two sides. Don't scratch up one side and then don't put the paint on that side. No, scratch up the surface where the paint is going to go. You don't need to scratch up both of them, just the one. Now once that's done, it's time to kind of clean it off. I like to use a baby wipe and then just let it dry. And then you need to put on your crackle paint. So I am not adding anything to this. This is just the clear crackle. And I'm going to put it into just a palette to work from. You don't have to do this. You could just put it directly on the window pane, but I wanted to be a little bit more precise with it. And then with a brush, I am just going to apply a very, very thick layer over both window panes or their openings. This does go on with a little bit of a milky finish, but as this dries, this will dry clear and it will crackle. One thing you do want to try to avoid are bubbles. Most of them will pop on their own. Don't shake this paint before you put it down unless you absolutely need to. And if you do get any bubbles, just use like a craft pick or a sewing needle and just give them a quick pop. You don't want any, you want the least amount of bubbles you can getting in there. So I am using that frame as an outline and I am just placing the crackle paint in a very thick layer, kind of globbing it on right inside that up to the point of the window frame itself. With this, you do want to keep a nice thick layer. The thing with this crackle paint, the thicker the layer, the bigger the crackles will be. The smaller the layer, the thinner the layer, the less crackling, and it's going to be very fine to where you hardly can see it. So I like a thicker layer. If you want it to show up, I would suggest a thicker layer. And then the hardest part, just let it dry. It does take a little bit of time to dry depending on your climate. Each one's going to be different. So I like to let it sit overnight. You can let it sit for a few hours. You could add some heat to it. Just be very careful because of that film under it. And you don't want to mess with the adhesive that's holding that film in place. So if you can, just set it aside to air dry. And while it's doing that, I like to work on the part that's going to go on top, which is that white cardstock piece. I save this for last to cover up any mishaps that I have while I'm putting down that crackle paint. This is going to cover those up for me. So I like to save it for last. I do a little bit of distressing on it. And then once this is dry, you can add that piece on top. Now here's the thing. You have the side that you put the crackle paint on. We're actually going to add the frame to the opposite side. So when we go to put this down, you don't have that crackle where your fingers can touch it. And what that's going to do is it's going to ensure that it stays on that piece of acetate a little bit better. Because if you have it flipped over to where it's kind of exposed to your fingers and the elements and your journal and all that stuff, it can chip off a little bit. So I like to work on the opposite side. You can see through it really well. I absolutely adore the way this turned out. But I like to put that piece with the paint on it, so the paint itself, I like to glue that down towards my journal so it's a little bit more protected. If you wanted to, you could put another piece of the film behind it to protect it even more. But I find that just gluing it down, kind of face down with the paint towards the journal itself, that works out really well for me and it protects itself. So I like to use a little bit more liquid glue. This time I'm not using such a strong glue. It's just the tack it over and over, I think, from Eileen's. And then I will just place that window frame down on top. And of course, this is the back side of that. So you're just really placing this down on top of that film itself. And then it's ready to go. That's all there is to it. If you really wanted to make this look a little bit more vintage, you could add some like alcohol inks in those cracks. There are a lot of different things you could do. You could do a little bit of whitewashing on them or a little bit of paint washing on the back of them as well for a little bit of an older look. You could add a little bit of stain to the crackle paint itself. But I just like the clear look. I think it looks really neat. So that's what I went with here. And here you can see it in the journal. Again, I just flipped it around so that crackling effect is protected. That's all there is to it. There are a number of different window files in that SVG to play around with this technique and try different things and kind of make the style your own. But that is it for the crackling effect for the window. Now I'm going to put it into a journaling page, which you can stick around and watch the entire journaling process if you want. First things first, where am I journaling at? Well, this is one of those journals that I made from some coffee dyed paper. All it is a piece of craft cardstock that I folded in half, and then several sheets of just plain kind of writing paper, if you will, from loose leaf paper is what it is. And I just coffee dyed it, folded it in half, and then sewed everything right down the middle. I have a tutorial on this. I will leave it linked in the top right hand corner if you want to check out how to make this journal yourself. That is where I am journaling at. As for what I am journaling, I love to journal quotes from books that I really love. And one of those books is The House in the Cerulean Sea, however you want to say it. It is such an adorable book. It's just kind of one of those heartwarming books. I absolutely adore it. But in there is this quote, and it is about kind of being broken and putting all the pieces back together. So that's kind of what I'm going with that window theme. You'll see the entire quote once we're towards the end of this journaling process. But from The House in the Cerulean Sea and that quote that I'm pulling from it, I also went through all my kind of vintage printables, ephemera that I have found myself from places like the Library of Congress and New York Public Library and Flickr. These are all kind of open access, public domain images that I've just pulled. What I've done is I've went through all of these and I've just pulled some of the images that kind of go with that. So if you've read the book, well, for one, I have kind of the spine of the book here. So there's the first thing. Then I have some pictures of a garden because it talks about one of the children gardening a lot in the book. And it is just a house that's kind of on a cliff. That's where the House in the Cerulean Sea comes from. The man in this book is actually from the city, and he has to go out and kind of investigate, if you will, do kind of a report on this house. I don't want to give too much of the book away if you're going to read it, but he has to leave the city. So, and when he leaves the city, he rides the train. So there's a little bit of a train ticket in there, and then he has to send these reports back to the headquarters. And so you'll see his notebook that he always carries around. And also there's like an urgent stamp that I thought went with that because he is sending reports back to headquarters. And then I'll add some buttons later because there is a little guy in there that is not exactly sure what, but he collects buttons. It's just a really sweet and heartwarming book, and from different parts of that, I just kind of grabbed things that reminded me of those pieces of the story. So that's what I'm working with here. I also have a bunch of writing that I just printed off, and that is on the left-hand page. that I stuck down, and now I am just adding a little bit of stenciling. So I'm using different colors of distressing just to add stenciling here and there, just for some interest and to really kind of dirty up those pages, if you will, make them not so bright white to start off with, or just blank to start off with. Sometimes that can be a little intimidating. So just adding a little bit of stenciling can help kind of start the process along. And in the long run, you're not going to see a lot of it. So if you really just start and have fun with it, that's all there is to it. Now I am putting together this opening page that I want to be in there. So I've got a picture of carrots and also that train ticket and the book spine. And I'm going to staple all of these together. Now on that book spine, I am going to put a little bit of a hinge. And in order to do that, I'm just going to use my bone folder and my paper trimmer and just put that fold right in there. That's going to allow this to be taped down to the page, but have that hinge on it to where I can open it back and forth. So as I was speaking before, I said a lot of my images come from places like the New York Public Library, the Library of Congress, the Met Museum. All of those places have a plethora of images and ephemera that are in the public domain. That means you can use them however you wish to in your journaling. You can use them for personal use. I believe you can use them even on things to sell when they are in the public domain. You might want to double check that. For me, I'm using them for personal use, and I put them on my blog for free, so I don't have to really worry about that. But what I like to do is kind of put these all into an 8.5 sheet where I can just print them off. Now, when I print off, I use a laser printer. Sometimes I'll put cardstock through, but a lot of times I just print them off onto regular computer paper. That way I have options. So what I like to do with those is I keep them in a binder, and then as I'm working, I can kind of pull them out, cut out the pieces I need. If I want them a little sturdier, I have a video on how I make them into ephemera, essentially. It's literally just gluing it down to a piece of cardstock. Sometimes I glue it down to like a an index card. You seen me doing that earlier in the video. That can give you a little bit of a writing surface on the back. But I have a video on how to create your own ephemera from these printables. I will leave that linked in the top right hand corner. Something I have noticed, just putting this out there, a lot of these images are popping up in different things you can buy. It's essentially the same thing. So just do your homework. If you want to buy the images pre-made, kind of collected for you, absolutely go for it. But a lot of these are popping up and you can just get them for free online. So just check around. You can check my blog. I have a Friday freebie going on now. And the last 3 weeks, so several weeks ago, for 3 weeks, I gave away these vintage botanicals. I had them all kind of cut out. You can print them and use them as ephemera. You can print them on sticker sheets and use them as stickers, which I love to do. But there's 3 sheets of those. We are now on to these ones with the black frame around them. They're called lantern slides. I have 5 sheets of those, and I always give you my source material if I can. If it's a collection of different things, I'm not going to go through and source each one of them. But for like these lantern slides where it's a collection, they're from the Library of Congress. I give you the source material. You can go in, you can find the ones you like, because I did not do all of them. I did 5 sheets. But there are several more. So you can go in, you can find them, you can print them off. So check that out. I will leave that link down in the description box below for you to check out. But there are so many free images out there. Just take an afternoon, scroll through them. You'll find so many. Something else I am adding to my journaling page are these dried flowers. So I've got some hydrangea, some kind of weedy yellow flowers. I don't know. I found them in my yard. And then I have some polka dot plant leaves, which I absolutely adore. I have a video on pressing and drying your own flowers. I will leave that linked in the top right hand corner. That was recent. That's something I do year round as plants are dying or I'm pruning. I just snip things off, press them up in a book. I was actually just cleaning out one of my cabinets the other day. I grabbed out a book and flowers fell out. I forgot I had even had them in there. So it's an ongoing process for me. Just remember you have them in there. But I went ahead and just grabbed some different leaves and things and dried flowers. I put them in there and I used a little bit of hot glue and a not brass, plastic, but it looks brass, button to hold that all in place, kind of a little bouquet of pressed flowers. And then I'm adding a few more buttons here and there. These are all gray in color that match each other. Again, these just kind of go with the story in the book. And then I am putting down this window frame finally. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this whole process, and I have such a hard time editing my journaling process because of it, is because I change things so much. So I start off and then I go from here to here to here to here to here. It's not a linear process for me. It's not a, okay, this is what I'm going to do and I do it. It is very much things change, things move. I like to see where things look the best. So for me, making these whole journaling processes is a little bit easier than trying to pull different pieces. Then it would just be so jumpy. You wouldn't know how I got from here to there to there. So from now on, I'm just leaving the whole thing in, and it is what it is. That's how I work. That's how I have to show it. Now, finally, I am adding that quote in. Like I said, it is a little bit of a longer one. What I did is I wrote it on a piece of that index card, and then I'm just playing around with the positioning of it. So what the quote actually says is, when something is broken, you can put it back together. It may not fit quite right or work like it did before, but it doesn't mean it's no longer useful. So I just thought it was really sweet. It's from a really sweet part in the book. And so I just went ahead, wrote that down on a bit of index card, just my handwriting. Not the best thing, but it works. You can by all means print it out if you don't love your handwriting like me. And then I'm adding a little bit of handmade paper to both sides of the journal just to kind of tie it all back together. Now, this handmade paper is another thing I shared on my YouTube channel not too long ago. I will also leave that linked if you want to check out that video. It's a very easy and fun process to do, especially during the summertime. I was crazy and did it in the winter, so if you do want to try that project, I would highly suggest doing it in the summer when it's warmer and you don't freeze your hands off. So I'll leave that linked in the top right hand corner. But to tie it all together, I'm adding a little bit of that handmade paper to both sides. And that is it. That is the journal spread. That's how I use that cracked window frame. So there's a lot in this video. I will leave all the links that I talked about down below in the description box. The supplies that I use that I can link, I will link them as well on my Amazon storefront page. That link also down in the description box. But a lot of this, again, is stuff that I pulled for free online. So check out those sources. Try and find some images of your own. It's a lot of fun to create your own ephemera. That window SVG file is going to be over on my blog for free as well. That's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and happy crafting.